All right. Thank you for tuning in to the Informal War Zone podcast style program. Really still trying to develop a format, but not just trying to be talking, doing a commentary show or anything. I really wanting to put some research in for everybody that's tuning in. Today is the 14th of April, 2020, and the topic that I have for us today is somewhat of a part 2 to the China virus theory, not necessarily talking about the CV-19, but more so our reliance on China and its exports, but not them just singling them out, but others as well, and how there is what I would call somewhat of an unholy alliance between those in our government and connected with those around the world, and specifically those with interest in China. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm not bashing anybody that's done business in China, that has Chinese business interests, even though I might not agree with their policies or their form and style of government, being a communist party. I understand the benefits of having your things outsourced there, although, like I said, I wouldn't willfully support their system. Nevertheless, today I want to share with you the research that I've been doing for the past couple of weeks, looking at this whole CV-19 thing, and more so the restructuring of the world, being that it was disconnected, and the major disconnection between governments and its people, locally, nationally, and also globally. I'm sure everybody has their own opinions and have probably heard enough commentary to last them a lifetime regarding the situation. So I wanted to bring newer angles, or let's say the ones that's not covered so much. And something that I've noticed in the news that's been very interesting is the actions of our government with the government of Venezuela, and within our recent past, all the deals that Venezuela has done with many other nations, in name China, Russia, Iran, institutions like Hezbollah. And I was like, wow, wait a second. All of these things are going on, but I wonder how many people are paying attention to what's being announced in the news. I wonder if maybe some of you guys out there noticed that it was mentioned that Nicolas Maduro, President of Venezuela, now known as the former Venezuelan President, was charged with narco-terrorism, corruption, drug trafficking, and other crimes, along with 14 others. I pulled this up from the Department of Justice. I'll read a couple of excerpts real briefly. I mean, you guys could go there and read it yourself as well. But on March 26, 2020, it says, former President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, Moros, Venezuela's Vice President for the Economy, Venezuela's Minister of Defense, and Venezuela's Chief Supreme Court Justice are among those charged in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Miami, along with current and former Venezuelan government officials, as well as two Fuerzas Armadas Revolutionaries de Colombia, FRC leaders, announced U.S. Attorney General William Barr, U.S. Attorney Jeffrey S. Berman of the Southern District of New York, U.S. Attorney Ariana Ferrado Roshan of District of Florida. And so you can read all the names for yourself. Quote, The Venezuela regime, once led by Nicolas Maduro Moros, remains plagued by criminality and corruption, end quote, said Attorney General Barr. For more than 20 years, Maduro and a number of high-ranking colleagues allegedly conspired with the FARC, causing tons of cocaine to enter and devastate American communities. Today's announcement is focused on rooting out the extensive corruption within the Venezuelan government, a system constructed and controlled to enrich those at the highest levels of the government. The United States will not allow these corrupt Venezuelan officials to use the U.S. banking system to move their illicit proceeds from South America, nor further their criminal schemes, end quote. Today we announce criminal charges against Nicolas Maduro for running, together with his top lieutenants, a narco-terrorism partnership with the FARC for the past 20 years, said U.S. Attorney Jeffrey S. Berman. Quote, the scope and magnitude of the drug trafficking alleged was made possible only because Maduro and others corrupted the institutions of Venezuela and provided political and military protection for the rampant narco-terrorism crimes described in our charges. As alleged, Maduro and the other defendants expressly intended to flood the United States with cocaine in order to undermine the health and well-being of our nation. Maduro very deliberately deployed cocaine as a weapon. While Maduro and other cartel members held lofty titles in Venezuela's political and military leadership, the conduct described in the indictment wasn't starcraft or service to the Venezuelan people. As alleged, the defendants betrayed the Venezuelan people and corrupted Venezuelan institutions to line their pockets with drug money, end quote. I would encourage anybody to go ahead and continue to read the rest of the indictment and the statement for yourself. It is rather lengthy. And I mean, what else are you doing? You're just sitting out. I mean, unfortunately, we're probably under these sit down at home orders, go to your room type of acts, by your tyrannical local government. Although, in the name of public health and safety, in my research, I would not take this stuff lightly, because this is just one angle of what I'm trying to provide as far as my research goes. We're in a hot war. It is World War IV, WWIV, and it's been going on for quite some time. And I tell you what, as I mentioned in previous podcasts, our enemies don't come under one banner or one flag, I should say. They're not uniformed, and they're all over. But so something that came to mind is, remember the State of the Union, okay, right after the impeachment of Trump and all the stuff that was happening with the House of Representatives and the Senate, found him, I guess, not guilty of the charges. Long story short, at the State of the Union, Trump was acknowledging a lot of veterans and people of good nature. And, more famously, Nancy Pelosi ripped up his speech. And what was funny is everybody talked about that the next day. Did you see Nancy Pelosi rip up his speech? I was like, yo, that's crazy. Did you guys just see him announce Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela? Like, forget Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech. The real news here is,
we are supporting the hopes of Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to restore democracy. The United States is leading a 59-nation diplomatic coalition against the socialist dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, a tyrant who brutalizes his people, but Maduro's grip on tyranny will be smashed and broken. Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to your family. Thank you, Mr. President. Great honor. Thank you very much. Please take this message back that all Americans are united with the Venezuelan people in their righteous struggle for freedom. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Excuse me. Is that we just named a president of another country. Like, hello, that in itself is an act of war. So before the whole CV, China virus talk and all this other stuff, I'll be like, yo, that's crazy. I mean, as far as the talk of the CV on American soil, but I'm like, dude, did Trump just announce Juan Guaido? Of course, if you've been following the news or you know anything about Venezuela and geopolitics, we was trying to do this last year, and Trump tweeted out, things about Juan Guaido as far as being the great opposition leader of the Venezuelan people and all this other stuff. And, it got hot last year in January. And even, I want to say 2018, but I know 2019 for real, when Trump was tweeting. Sorry, I don't have those tweets readily available. Nevertheless, the reality of it is, you just don't go, naming like presidents of countries, and then outside of that, a couple months later, charge the quote unquote former president with narco-terrorism and all kind of other stuff. Let's see, I'll go to Barr's remarks on it real briefly. This was also, let me see their date. Yeah, also the 26th of March, 2020. I'm not going to read all this stuff. Anyway, so I'll do this with you guys while I'm here. So let's go. I'll open up a new tab. We'll go to, that search engine. And we'll put in President of Venezuela. Now I have a point that I'm about to make. Now I just mentioned that Trump named Juan Guaido as the interim president, but now we go to this search engine, and boom, who's they saying? As of November, the Venezuelan president crisis is unresolved, and who holds the office is disputed since January 10, 2019, when the opposition majority National Assembly declared that incumbent Nicolas Maduro's 2018 re-election was invalid, and the body declared its President Juan Guaido to be acting president of Venezuela. So we have that. Well, I was coming here because when I did this not too long ago, it still calls Maduro as the Venezuelan president, even despite our charges. So something's happened. This search engine has changed within the last couple of days. Anyway, let's see. Let's go to news. All right. Nothing that I was seeing right away. But anyway, the image that I saw was that the president of Venezuela is still Nicolas Maduro. So I bring that up to say, oh, there it is. So maybe that's what. So Nicolas Maduro 2013, still active as the president, regardless of what Trump says. But that's not the point of my research today. The point of my research today is all of the business plans and things that Venezuela had with Russia and China and Iran and all these other nations. So let's go into it. Let's see. Right here we have February 7th, 2019. China and Russia loaned billions to Venezuela, and then the presidency went up for grabs. So these are real issues that's been on the table. So I'm tying this into the COVID, whatever you want to call it, not taking it lightly, that when Trump announced Guaido and formally recognized him at the United States State of the Union as the president of Venezuela, all hell broke loose. And furthermore, and I'll share this later at a later time and date, but the killing of Soleimani was very, very critical. I'm still trying to unearth what it really truly is, so I don't want to really display it right now. But I know that along that same time, there's all kind of false flags that was planned over there in Europe. LightOnTheTruth.com, I believe I've seen the interview today with SGT Report. Like I say, today's the 14th of April, 2020. He was basically unveiled something that I didn't know, so I still have to research that. But he was basically saying that there was all kind of attacks that was planned in Europe around October 23rd and October 24th, 2019, which is, as I mentioned before, is already interesting dates regarding the Wuhan military games, Nancy Pelosi meeting with the Italian president, Cummings passing away on that October 17th. Just that time period in general in October was very interesting. Something else I stumbled upon, I'll share that, is that the CDC shut down a BSL-4 lab or BSL-3 lab in, I want to say, Indiana. I have that research. But it was in June of 2019, which was really interesting because this is a lab that probably could have been working on, like, it doesn't matter, but they were shut down abruptly. Still looking into that too. And then, like you say, the first reports is coming out of the China virus was being reported in November. So I'm just thinking all these things through. I'm trying to remember the day that we killed Soleimani, but nevertheless, the NATO was going to get some kind of attack, and the UN would have got some kind of attack regarding their thing in Brussels, their little meeting, but it would have been a false flag that would have basically activated the UN troops militarily for a global response. But I guess they were tipped off, and it didn't go the way it was planned. And like I say, I'm still researching that, but I'm tying it all in because the virus is a real thing. You know, the release is real. People are really dying, and the fact of it is this an outlash, retaliation, or more so maybe a hostage type of takeover where they're like, screw it, we'll just scorch earth. And so we have to take whomever and whatever this entity is very seriously. Now, looking into some of these business deals that Venezuela had with China and Russia regarding their oils, we'll go ahead and read briefly. It says Venezuela is in the middle of a power struggle at the highest level, and that could mean trouble for its two biggest foreign allies, China and Russia. The socialist petrol state is home to the largest oil reserves on the planet, but endemic corruption has devastated its economy. So this is back in February 7th, 2019. Beijing and Moscow have helped the country stave off collapse by repeatedly extending financial lifelines to the tune of tens of billions of dollars over the last decade. For the most part, those oil for debt swaps were good for all parties involved, but that may be changing. So, over a year ago, they're even talking about this situation. So when our president, let's see, I just read to you how Maduro and gang is, I mean, we're talking about his military and all of this, are part of narco-terrorism and all kind of other dubious and probably malicious acts. So we at the State of the Union say, oh yeah, he's no longer president. Then we indict him and some of his generals. That's a very big deal. Says with the United States and others backing opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's legitimate president over dictator Nicolas Maduro, it could take longer for Russia and China to get their money back. And in the case of some loans, they may not get anything back at all. Quote, I do not think they like regime change. I don't think they like the idea of the U.S. is seemingly declaring somebody president, says Halima Croft, global head of commodity strategy at RBC Capital Markets. Quote, both Xi and Putin would be horrified if the U.S. got any ideas about trying to do this in any of their countries or countries that they view as satellite states. So, if China, in an act of retaliation regarding the trade wars, as they call them, I guess it's not even a call them. If you notice the port shipping and all this stuff, it is down. It is probably almost at a global standstill. But the tariff wars, the trade wars, we just signed the phase 1 of the deal, supposedly. And all of a sudden, there's a Wuhan outbreak. Now, like I say, I'm eager to do more research on the NATO thing and the 39 terror attacks that I heard of tonight. Now, like I say, that's the first time I heard of it. I did some brief research. A lot of coincidences around that same time. The embassy of Israel, all embassies, all the Israeli embassies around the world closed down. So this period of October to December, which in December, the Harvard head university chemist or whatever his name is, the thing I mentioned earlier in my last report, him and the other Chinese PLA members, their army members, military, got caught trying to smuggle vials out of the U.S. He's a Harvard professor, head of the chemistry department, has a lab over there in Wuhan. Crazy stuff tied to George Soros. Not surprised he done popped up. Like I say, I'm sure you guys heard all of these things. I'm just trying to bring in a new angle. And if you haven't, go to band.video because it's definitely more than enough information there to catch you up to speed. Moving forward, it's mentioning right here that both Z, whatever his name is, and Putin would be horrified if the U.S. got any ideas about trying to do this in any of their countries or countries that they view as satellite. Well, what did we just do? Well, we named Maduro as a narco-terrorist, arrested his crew. You know what I'm saying? All around the world, people are getting rounded up, by the way. And I would like to, attribute that to executive order that Trump signed on December 21st, 2017. Said, I will go get you wherever you're at in the globe. So like I say, I believe this is a global reset. It feels pretty bad, mainly because people are in desperate times and desperate needs. And my heart and prayers go out to those that's hurting, that's lost their jobs, that don't know how they're going to make their next meal, next payment, or anything. I mean, the effects are real. And yeah, we are at war. And there are casualties to war. And there's pain and suffering during war. But in the end, we're not fighting for victory. We need to remind ourselves that we're fighting from a place of victory, for the battle is already won. The things they doing to these churches and all this, well, you got to wake God's people up sometimes, somehow. Because right now, they would be the first ones, Cleaning starts at the church. There's a lot of people sleep right now, man. And so they're seeing it for what it's worth. Like, oh, you thought the government was just going along to get along? Better wake up. So I would encourage you to read this report. It's by CNBC, but the information in there is, it's baseline. It's funny to see how they report things. Let's see. We'll read a couple lines. The situation keeps deteriorating. Guaido has said all lawful agreements approved by Venezuela's National Assembly will be honored, a statement widely seen as an olive branch to China. Thus far, Beijing is still publicly backing Maduro. Quote, they are worried the opposition will come in and not necessarily want to honor their contracts or find loopholes, said Russ Dallin, managing partner of investment bank Caracas Capital Markets. But Dallin acknowledged that Beijing's loyalty may not last. Quote, the Chinese do not know what to do. They're not getting paid by Maduro's guys, and the situation keeps deteriorating. So that's just one angle that I was looking at. So we'll go into another one. Let's see. This would be a report a little bit earlier from January 23rd, 2019. Amid the Venezuelan crisis, a look at oil, Russia, and Trump. So then you go through the same deal. But we'll get to the military aspects now because, it's pretty redundant. But this is 2 years ago. Growing military ties. China-Russia week-long war games. So we understand that China and Russia already are working together. And so it's funny that they have a vested interest in Venezuela. And geographically, Venezuela is not too far from the United States. This article right here just talks about how they have tens of thousands of troops, China and Russia, doing invasions, mock invasions. They're not really saying, but I would say somewhat of mock invasions of the U.S., and lo and behold, guess where they flew a lot of their military people and their equipment to? To Venezuela. So this report's from the Iranian a year ago, as the last report was. It says China's PLA troops in Venezuela, a watershed moment in world politics. The reported arrival of Chinese military personnel in Venezuela last weekend is undoubtedly a major event in world politics. Now let me find a date for you guys here. I thought there was one. It just says 1 year ago. Report by MK. But I don't know what that is. Anyway, can't find a date. So moving on to verse 2 or paragraph 2. Unlike Russia, which has a history of force projection abroad, this is an extremely rare Chinese move. Although vital Chinese interests are at stake in the war against terrorist groups in Afghanistan and Syria, China refrained from publicizing any such deployment. The reports mention that the group of Chinese military personnel is 120 strong and arrived on the Margarita Island in the Caribbean Sea off the Venezuelan mainland on March 28th, I would imagine that's 2019, to deliver humanitarian aid and military supplies to the government forces. After delivering the humanitarian supplies, the Chinese PLA troops were apparently transferred to a Venezuelan military facility. Now, that's the problem with Americans, and the good thing about this time is that now we can sit down and catch up. Now we can understand what has been going on while we've been slaving at the 9 to 5 or doing whatever, making a good living, partying, having a great time with the family. Doesn't matter. This doesn't matter to people. You know what I mean? This just goes by people. Like, hey, did you know Chinese and Russian troops are on Venezuelan soil? I don't care. Of course you wouldn't. You know what I mean? Because you have it. You have no idea of the consequences. Well, after this, and we can understand how China is basically in control of 75 to 80% of our supply chain, medical supplies, medicines, medical equipment, let alone just regular components that finish the product of most of the goods sold in America. It could be an American company, but it needs a component or proponent from China because it's massively produced cheaper there. So these are just ways of business, and now we're seeing the detriment to not having our own factories, not producing our own medicines, our own medical equipment and supplies. Why there is a problem with everything that we have in our house made in China, made in Venezuela, made in Vietnam is what I meant to say, made somewhere else besides America. Okay, and then if you do buy American, you complain about, oh, well, it costs more. Well, yeah, I'll pay that extra dollar if I know that extra dollar is going towards somebody else that's employed here, that's feeding their family, like I have a job to feed my family. You know what I mean? Whereas you're getting things done on slave labor. Like literally, these people ain't getting paid. Like, you don't fix the working conditions. You put up a suicide net. Is that a joke? You know, so these people don't, well, whatever. They're communists. You're going to tell me communists value life? So, I mean, that's your own argument. Tell me a plan that works. So here it is. You have this communist regime messing with another communist regime. One has the most oil in the world. The other has a bunch of fraudulent technology and what would say is money, but they're currency manipulators. You know, so we're in a real war, multifaceted. And like, do you notice how our media is backing everything China does? And well, do you realize that Chinese troops have snuck in through the border of all those caravans in the past years? Not only them, but Hezbollah, Iran, Russian soldiers, everybody's here. So everybody's like, oh, I'm tired of being inside. We need to open up the economy. Hey, I agree, you know, but the reality is you don't even know who your neighbor is. You don't even know these military troops that's here that's you've probably been working with. And that's just the reality, you know, and they're ready to drop a bioweapon. They're ready to go hot. They're ready to bring a whole bunch of innocent civilians to, you know, what do they call them, suicide bombing attacks or whatever. We don't know what they're due. But this war front is totally different because we really don't know who the enemy is. It's multifaceted. Moving further down this article, says a week ago, around 100 Russian military personnel were deployed to Venezuela to install a military helicopter training facility, but details of the Chinese PLA mission have not been disclosed. There is close coordination between Moscow and Beijing on foreign policy issues, and it is entirely conceivable that the two countries' deployments are synchronized moves. Now remember, on the news they showed us that, oh, they're just giving aid and helping with the supplies and da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, you didn't know about that military helicopter training facility, did you? That also came in on these ships. So when our president announces Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela before everybody in the world at our State of the Union, it did not surprise me that something big was about to happen. The code name was COVID. And that's kind of crazy. So you'd be like, Chinese virus. Well, it doesn't matter where it really came from. What I'm trying to tell you is you have China and Russia saying they are Venezuela's two main creditors, and they have been the principal economic force keeping the Maduro government afloat. making the difference between solvency and bankruptcy, financial experts say. So do you think the U.S. is going to, like, in other words, where do we think this war is at? Where do we think this war is going? Do you think it's any accident that we have the government shut down right now? And you don't know why? You're like, oh, it has never happened before. But if you listen to the press conferences, you listen to the attorney general saying, well, these rights they're only restricted in times of war, and then we have the right to restrict some rights. You're saying, well, so are we at war, AG? You listen to Trump, like, well, it's a war against the virus, Yeah. The invisible enemy. Yeah, I helped display that, and we'll go here and then I'll close it up. I just want to show you this map. We'll zoom in on Venezuela. Yeah, I could talk about Bill Gates and his crazy butt and all this other stuff, but I like to bring different angles because it's all tied in once you get into it. If you look here, you look at Venezuela, and then you could look over here. You got Puerto Rico, British Virgin Islands, Haiti, Dominica, Venezuela, Caraco. But in this, you have all kind of private islands as well, and all different type of establishments. But what I wanted to show is the proximity from Venezuela to America. And as we read in the report, they wanted to flood the U.S. with drugs and stuff, and all kind of other trafficking. When you just look at this region, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, we can acknowledge, oh, they're coming up from here. People forget those caravans. What do you think came through this border from Venezuela? There's one more report. Let me go to the bookmarks. One more report, and I want to say that was from the Iranians. The Iranians was, maybe that was the same one. Yeah, I'll cut that out. So, I want to say in here that I saw something about the Iranian military too. But bringing this to a close, I just thank you for your time. I understand that something big is going on. We know that this is a war, and it's multifaceted. And at this point, it's psychological. And when you could look at how these governors are, what I would say, getting out of control and doing a whole bunch of unnecessary actions. But then when I think about it and think about Russia, China, Venezuela, and other actors, jihadists, people forget about the terrorist group that was found, or not group, but the terrorist installation. They said they was training the kids to shoot up schools and all that stuff that was found in New Mexico. It's like we forget about these things so quick. We don't have a memory. Everything goes so fast. But I just want to encourage everybody, stay strong. Know God is in control, and that this didn't catch God off guard. This did not come as a surprise to him. But stay alert, keep your eyes open, keep your ears clicked, and continue to ask for the hand of the Lord to stay on you and guide you and lead you. Appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in to the Informal War Zone. My name is JL, and peace and blessings.
Become probably the cocaine capital of the world.
Venezuela is currently in deep political turmoil after years of an economic depression unparalleled in the Western world. Both a dictator and interim president are vying for power, and deep under the surface, its highest-ranking government officials, with the help of the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah, have built a massive drug trade to enrich themselves.
Venezuela has become worse than a narco state. I consider it to be a mafia state.
Ever since Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999, Venezuela's leaders have indulged in the drug trade. What was once the richest country in Latin America has become, according to some U.S. experts, the cocaine hub of the Western Hemisphere.
The Cartel of the Suns, or Cartel de los Soles, as it's known in Latin America, is a loose federation of government officials and military officers in Venezuela, primarily from the National Guard there, that have become a criminal organization moving tons of cocaine into Europe, to the United States, and then they transited through the Caribbean and then also Central America, Mexico. The Cartel of the Suns actually originated in the early 1990s, and they started to form alliances with subversive organizations that are engaged in drug trafficking, such as the Armed Revolutionary Forces of Colombia, better known by its acronym, the FARC, and then also the ELN, the National Liberation Army. Initially, what they did is they turned a blind eye. They let these organizations run drugs through their country, but then the Venezuelans wanted to become masters of their own universe, so they started to play a more active role in not only transportation, but also in distribution. And the reason for that being is that they needed more money because of the downward spiraling economy in Venezuela.
Venezuela has become probably the cocaine capital of the world. And so anything that moves not just to the United States, to Brazil and Argentina, or to Europe, or to Africa, every major cocaine trafficking cartel in the world has had a presence in Venezuela over the last 20 to 30 years.
I would say that Venezuela was a narco state several years ago, but it has become darker and more ominous, and I consider it to be a mafia state.
Drugs are not only being pushed across landlocked borders. From at least 2007 to 2012, Venezuela's Conviasa Airlines carried drugs, cash, and people into the country by air from Iran. This flight became known as Aeroterror.
So Aeroterror was for weekly flights, and despite the fact that they were advertised, supposedly advertised commercially, you really couldn't buy a ticket on these flights if you logged on the internet with your credit card. These were flights that were designed to facilitate the transfer of cash, potentially of weapons and of drugs in both directions. Venezuela became a strategic partner of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Their hostility for the United States is really what brought them together. And within a few years, and especially during the presidency of Iran's leader Mahmoud Ahmadinejad from 2005 to 2013, this connection really flourished. It led to the establishment of direct flights for a time between Tehran and Caracas through Damascus. Now the flight ended, but now there seems to be a new opportunity to re-establish that connection, because we just heard an aircraft from Mahan Air, the Iranian private airline, recently landed in Caracas. There is little commercial value to this route. I can't imagine flocks of Iranian tourists running to Isla Margarita for a long weekend break or a winter vacation. I can imagine even less Venezuelans traveling to Tehran for similar purposes. But clearly this direct flight will facilitate certain illicit activities that the two regimes are conducting together.
Venezuela is an air bridge for Iranian and Hezbollah operations all throughout the Western Hemisphere and Latin America in particular. This particular weekly flight that started in Caracas, stopped in Damascus, and then in Tehran, and went back, lost upwards of $30 million in 3 years. Iran has used commercial flights to benefit their strategic WMD programs, including their ballistic missile program and potentially their nuclear program as well. Hugo Chavez understood that you can operationalize drug trafficking as an intelligence network to get around borders and bureaucracies. In that sense, I think Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, understood that concept as well, and they teamed up to use drug trafficking as a way to infiltrate societies.
At the center of Aero terror and the trade route between Venezuela and the Middle East is Tarek El-Assami, the former vice president of Venezuela and current minister of industry and national production. He's been known by many names, including El Trupial, Tango Alpha, and TEA.
Tarek El-Assami. He was given executive powers over all elements of the national economy. Tarek El-Assami's family originates from Asawida, Syria. His great uncle is a gentleman named Shibli El-Assami, who's one of the co-founders of the Ba'athist Party in Syria and the former general secretary of the Iraqi command branch of the Iraqi Ba'ath Party in Iraq. So his family has a tremendous amount of prominence with the Assad government and a tremendous amount of prominence with Arab nationalist families in the Middle East. The role of Iran and Hezbollah in Venezuela in particular, but Latin America as a whole, they have sent some very important people to Venezuela over the last 10 to 15 years, including on behalf of Iran, leaders of the Basij, which is known as a movement to repress mobilizations and student protests in Iran. And I can tell you that they're also in Venezuela to protect the Nicolas Maduro regime. Between 2007 and 2009, General Mohammad Reza Nagdi, the former commander of the Basij, was detected in Venezuela to be able to provide counterintelligence support and communications capabilities to the colectivos, which is civilian militias armed and funded by the Venezuelan government. And then Iran capitalized on this new immigration system called SAIME to be able to provide documentation to Middle Eastern operatives so that they can operate throughout Latin America. It would give them a driver's license, a property record, bank record, even a birth certificate, so that somebody from the Middle East could say they're Venezuelan, even though they never stepped foot in Venezuela and travel freely throughout other parts of the world, particularly in Europe.
So where exactly does the United States come in? Cocaine use in America has been on the rise since 2010, and Venezuela has been the Western world's #1 supplier.
Getting rid of Maduro is a distraction more than a goal. If Hezbollah were to lose Venezuela as its principal drug supplier, they have other countries that are doing similar activity, notably Bolivia and tri-border area. Well, we need to not just look at the regime and one individual, Nicolas Maduro, but we have to remember that there was a revolution that put the regime to power in the first place. Regimes can change, but revolutions remain if they're clear on their goal. Revolutions have an end state, and the Bolivarian Revolution is still active in Latin America. The Bolivarian Revolution is designed to weaken and attack sovereignty, to weaken and attack the United States, and to destabilize our regional allies.
But one question remains. What is the goal of America's Venezuela policy, given the ongoing turmoil and the vested interests of Iran and other global players?
The goal of Venezuela is not simply to change a regime. The goal is to stop a revolution.